Okay guys, so today we'll be going over differentiation and specifically the product and quotient rules. So first let's start off with just stating the product rule. So the product rule. So this rule states that if we have to find the derivative, which is d over dx, of a function f of x times another function g of x, then to find that derivative, all you have to do is find the derivative of the first function and you multiply it by the normal second function, and this will be one part of our process, and then you add it to the normal first function multiplied by the derivative of the second function. Okay, now this is the product rule, very simple. Basically, say it's like 5x squared times 2x, right? And you find the derivative of this. This would be f of x right here, and this would be g of x. And so that, then you just use the formula and you get the answer. Very simple and straightforward. Let's also quickly go over the formula for the quotient rule. So the quotient rule. This one is a little more annoying, but it's also fairly straightforward. So for this one, when we find the derivative, which is d over dx of a function f of x over a function g of x, what we have to do here is, it's a little more complicated, but it's still relatively simple. So you take the normal g of x and multiply it with the f prime x, the derivative of the top. So you take the denominator, normal, multiply it to the derivative of the top, minus f of x times g prime x. So this part is pretty much the same as the product rule, except you're just subtracting the two instead of adding them. But this part is entirely new. You have to get g of x and you just square this. So this is the quotient rule. Same as before, say you have like 5x squared over 3x. This is f of x and this is g of x. Very simple, just plug it in and you should be able to get your answer. Okay, so now let's go on and do our first product rule example. So this one is saying we have to find the derivative of 5x cubed times cosine x. Okay, now this should be, if you know your derivatives of trig, this should be very easy, right? So first we have to find the derivative of f of x, which is 5x cubed. So that would be 15x squared, because you multiply the 3 with the 5 and you subtract 1, so you get 15x squared, and you multiply that with the normal cosine, so we get cosine x, and then we do plus, we do the normal 5x cubed times the derivative of cosine, which is negative sine, and now we simplify, so we get this equals to 15x squared cosine x minus 5x cubed sine x, and this would be your answer. So for fairly straightforward, you just, applying how we found derivatives in the previous video to this, it's just a few more steps and very simple. Let's move on to another example of product rule. This one is entirely trig, so just make sure you know your trig derivatives. So this one, the only part where we have a product or like multiplying is 2x cosine x, because when it's just 2 without a variable, we can just leave that as it is, and we don't have to do anything. So for this one, we do the same thing, 2, which is the derivative of 2x, times cosine x, which is normal cosine x, plus 2x times the derivative of cosine x, which is negative sine x, and then minus 2 cosine x. Okay, and now we get 2 cosine x minus 2x sine x minus 2 cosine x. Now, straight away we can see there's a 2 cosine x here and a negative 2 cosine x here. We can cancel those two out because they're opposites. And so our answer is negative 2x sine x. Very simple. I think it's pretty much like, what we learned in the basic derivatives, but just like an extra step. Now let's move on to the quotient rule. This one is a little more annoying because it gets messy and you have to deal with fractions, but it's still relatively the same. So let's just get straight into it. So if we want to find the derivative, which is y prime, we have to find I like to just do derivative of top times the basic of bottom, but if we're going by how I wrote in the formula before, we do the basic x squared minus 1 times 4, because that's the derivative of 4x minus 2, minus the derivative of the bottom, which is 2x, because that is the derivative of the bottom. And if you don't know how I'm getting these derivatives, make sure to go check out my previous video on the basics of differentiation. And so that is the derivative of x squared minus 1, and you multiply by 4x minus 2. And this is all over the bottom x squared minus 1 squared. Now, if we simplify this, we get 4x squared, because I'm just, multiplying in, FOIL method kind of basically. 4x squared minus 4 minus 8x squared um, minus, or plus because of this subtraction sign, plus 4x. And this is all over x squared minus 1 squared. So y prime is equal to negative 4x squared plus 4x minus 4 over x squared minus 1 squared. Now this, you could leave this as your answer, right? Because this is pretty much it. But if you want to simplify a bit more, what you can do is y prime is equal to, just factor out the negative 4. And you get x squared minus x plus 1 over x squared minus 1 squared. And that would be your answer. So similar to the product rule, you just got to make sure you know how to do derivatives and just follow the formula and you're pretty much set. Let's do one last practice problem for quotient rule. Now this one, if you know your trig identities, you know that sine x over cosine x is equal to tan x, but we want to find the derivative. So of course we could just do the derivative of tan x, but let's first just try to solve this normally, like how we would use quotient rule. So cosine x times the derivative of sine x, which is cosine x, minus the derivative of cosine x, which is negative sine x, times sine x, all over cosine squared x. Now if we just simplify this, we get cosine squared x plus, because, negatives, two negatives will cancel out to be a positive. So we get plus sine squared x over cosine squared x. Now, if you know your Pythagorean identity for trig identities, then you should know that cosine squared x plus sine squared x is equal to 1. So we get 1 over cosine squared x, which equals to secant squared x because of, again, trig identities, which another thing, it's very important for you guys to know your trig identities at this point, so I'd highly recommend you do that. And so this is pretty much it for product and quotient rules. I think it's very straightforward. All you need to know is these two rules, and you're pretty much set. You just know your derivatives and know these rules, and you'll be fine. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please leave a comment down below, and watch my previous videos if you don't understand what I'm doing in this video.